You listen to the smooth sound of jazz and all colors with Donna Franklin on KTSU 90.9 and online at KTSU.
Didn't want any artists in my family. We had encyclopedias, so I would go look at those and look at the paintings, and didn't discriminate. I'm like, I love all of this stuff. And so I think the fire comes from within the individual, not necessarily the community. It's like in any community there's going to be people that don't think like the group. Right. And I was that person in my community. I was like, I don't understand what all of this stuff is, but I know that I'm interested in it and I want this to be my life.
Cult of Color.
Right.
Which I had sort of forgotten about, so Nate just reminded us.
Mm-hmm.
Theater production.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us about that. Tell about that first. And I have some follow-ups.
Well, the piece is called Cult of Color, Call to Color, and it's a ballet. And I was approached by Stephen Mills from Ballet Austin. He's the head choreographer there in 2005, I think it was. And I just started a new body of work dealing with this one character who was sort of a Moses type of character, leading these his people into salvation. And it was based around color, and it was a real hopeful sort of platform that I made for myself. So that just happened to be.
Wait, what do you mean it was a hopeful platform?
Well, a fruitful platform, I should say, like a story that I created that would yield many, many images and keep me busy, basically. But also, it was kind of dealing with, you know, coming out of darkness into the light in some ways, but it was also about the failure of countercultures, you know, to have any kind of real or lasting effect. They're kind of a quick fix sometimes, and that's what this piece was about. But anyway, so when Stephen approached me, he had been looking for a way to get to breathe new life into his ballet company by working with a fine artist and using their vision as the basis for the dance piece. And I had been looking for a way to get out of the white box or the white cube, the gallery, and do something a little bit more adventurous or risky. So it was perfect timing in a lot of ways, because I got to elaborate on these paintings I was making. And I wrote the script. I provided the script because I write out, you know, back in the day I wrote out everything and then made paintings based on some of the writings. Sometimes vice versa. Yeah, I'd make the paintings and then fill in the textual information but it would always turn into some pretty solid, you know, once upon a time kinds of stories.
Right.
And so this worked out perfectly for their, you know, what they needed, because you know, as a dance piece, we needed a beginning, a climax, and an end. And you know, we worked for the whole production took 3 years to make. The first year was just sitting around round tables with, I don't want to say execs, but the ballet people there, and the choreographer and the composer, and we're all just talking about the characters and what are their motivations, and hey, let's massage this part of the story and make it work a little better. And
how was that? I mean, this is a story you wrote.
Right.
How was that opening it up to, you know, this collaborative thing?
I was perfectly fine with it because that was the nature of the beast, you know, coming into it. It's like, I'm not only letting people into my studio, they're letting me into their studio. It had to be this even exchange, but I think we all knew that the source material was, in a way, that it was gospel, you know, and that we couldn't deviate too far from that, or then my vision is compromised. So, you know, then why have me on board?
Right, right.
So I tried to not put too much into the dance aspect of it. There wasn't much I could put in. I mean, I guess I could have tried to guide the movement, but you know, in some ways I wanted to leave that to professionals. There's a guy who spent his whole life doing that, and he's the one that approached me, so I figured he had some pretty solid ideas about what he would have liked to have seen, and I was very curious to see what those were. And fortunately, it all ended up being really amazing and respectful to the source material, and provided me a new way to look at characters that I made.
Yeah. So you said before, like, you were looking for a way to get out of the gallery space, or the cube, you know, white box. Before that, like, had you tried any other avenues, or like?
Well, in some ways, the ballet, coming into that world and seeing how it operated, wasn't too terribly different than growing up in church and getting up in front of people all the time and performing. You know, having to get up and speak, or being behind the drums, or being in the choir. And watching my mom do the same thing, or my dad, you know, preach every Sunday. Like,
your father's a preacher?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh, so you deep in the church?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Roots.
Okay.
Those are the roots.
That was it. 3 times a week.
show card once of you in like some kind of costume. And I don't know if it was a performance. Oh no! I remember you doing performances.
Okay.
There was one at the Glassell.
Right.
Where there was something with like balloons, like something would go into this. Do you remember that piece?
Yes, the balloons coming out the behind.
Yep.
Right.
So I'm restaging that piece in January. It'll be similar but different.
My memory's so bad. That's crazy. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, so performing. I've been performing since 96, 97.
But I mean, outside of performance, like the ballet, right? It's not just another like medium, right? Or another way to do work. It's like another world, right? In terms of like, it's not the fine arts, visual arts world. Right?
Oh man, it was completely different because, I mean, like I said, having had some performance in my background, I felt like I was wasn't totally out of my, it wasn't totally foreign to me coming in there. But at the same time, the audience for ballet or dance is completely different. A different sense of humor, different expectations. They dress different, they talk different. Everything is different about that world. The rules, none of it lines up with what I was used to. So, in that regard, there was a lot of learning to be done. A lot of, I won't say holding my tongue, but certain things I could get away with saying in the art world wouldn't fly.
Wouldn't work.
In ballet world.
I guess that all these avenues, how have you, strategized about which ones are successful and what's ideal? And,
Well, yeah, I guess in terms of like, if I think of art as democracy and art for the people and getting out there in any way possible, I don't close any doors. Like everything seems viable to me as a viable option for a platform for the work. That's why when ballet came along, I was like, I'll jump through that door. Around the same time, I was offered a chance to do an opera, but I was like, but that would be me interpreting someone else's material. And I was like, well, I actually want this to be my material, so I went with the ballet because it's and so with the comic book, like that's people have access to it. A lot of people can get their hands on it and feel like they have a piece of art. Even though it's something mass produced, it still has the integrity that I would say a painting should have. Maybe gallerists don't want to hear that, but it's it's just another branch of, I'd say, what's central in my work, which is this. I don't know. I feel at once like I feel a bit like a punk or an anarchist or something, a little bit sometimes.
You feel that way?
I do. I actually feel that way. It's like, how do I? Some of the things I want to say don't line up, and maybe it's just because I grew up in a puritanical situation. Some of the taboos I have in my head may not be actual taboos, but I can't get out of that box in my head that maybe this is going against God and the laws of man and all these other structures that are sacred. And sometimes I feel like my work is antithetical to some of that. But
like it's to the world you grew up in. I like the
yeah, but I'm not an anarchist in the sense that I want to take a spray paint and go bomb a building and tear down political structures, and I get off on seeing things crumble. That's not me, but in some ways, slowly, it's like a over time kind of thing. Like the work gets into the system and blows up from the inside.
And so, are you still like a religious person?
Spiritual, but not maybe religious. The thing that you write on your OkCupid profile. Spiritual, but not religious. But I still have great respect for the people in my family and the way that they see things, which to me sometimes is very concrete. There's not a lot of room for other things to come in, but maybe I can blame it on my artistic lifestyle.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking, I was going to say it must be tough, but like, I think we probably all exist in similar situations, like, especially black in Texas.
Right, oh yeah.
Yeah,
there's certain expectations.
Right, and then you get into this art world, which is
totally different.
It's everything but that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost anything goes, and like, it's uncomfortable, then you're okay with some stuff, and, it's a whole...
Right, you're constantly trying to figure out where your boundaries are.
Right.
And that's what I think I do in my work is like, well, is it okay for me to do this? And then I'll do that, and then after it's all said and done, of course it was okay for me to do that. I'm very happy with those results, and I feel better having done it. Ballet is case in point. It those are things like, is this really me? Or, you know, what are people going to say?
Yeah.
You know, those questions came into my mind, but quickly were put to rest after I got in it and realized, oh yeah, the grit and integrity of the thing I was doing before with the paintings, which I was in full control of, I can still have that, and then some in these other ways. So, I don't know, it's about increments and incrementally bringing things into my fold that I can understand. In that way, this, you know, the mound character that I've made, or whatever, that's central to my universe, is, if you had to think about it metaphorically, it's about being centered. You know, the mound as Buddha, maybe, or.
And that's how I've always assumed those things work. Like, you know, these are metaphors for some large ideas. Not that I always understood everything that was going on, but so yeah, so a centered, almost Buddha-like character.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe not as enlightened, because I think in somewhere that there's a pathos with the mound character that he's the victim. He's constantly a victim, and he doesn't have the agency to act in the ways that he needs to protect himself. He doesn't have the wherewithal or the perspective over himself as a being or a race. So it's almost like the mound as earth, just as this thing that is stable. And then other characters come in and try to disrupt that stability, you know, with their own, they have their own agendas. It's just, so, and again, all these things are parts of myself that I have separated out to become this cosmology or
How wide is your universe now?
Square footage? I don't.
No, I mean.
No, I know. It's pretty. It branches. My goal was at one point was, how do I make an art that is as rich as the world that I'm taking in, or the world that I exist in? You know, it's like an alternate universe or something. But at some point, I think. And the work always runs its course. Things that I'm interested in, sometimes I become uninterested, but it's always at the right time. I try to know when that happens. But it's like, okay, I could keep building this mythology in a Dr. Seussian kind of way, where it's like characters meet other characters, and then they give birth, and I talk about their histories and all of this. That can keep going forever. But, and I think some people would be perfectly okay with that. I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because the format is predictable.
Well, you like away from the narrative. So what are the new ways?
So after the Saint Sesame and the Cult of Color thing, where I was talking about the Moses character, that after the ballet was over in 2008. Paintings that remained that had to be made to finish that story, I was like, well, I want to experiment and do something maybe a little bit looser, a little bit more different with them. And so it became more about icons, and these icons that were in the work and they rose to the top, and I kind of used them as, what would I say, building blocks or modules to create new kinds of compositions. So it became more about the material, just about how do I make an interesting composition, and not so much about story, or, you know, this character did this to this character.
Right.
So And people get tired of looking at stuff. You know, I get tired of looking. I get tired of myself in the studio. It's like, I don't want to see this anymore.
Did those characters lead you to a point where you wanted to expand, or was it something outside of the characters that led you to this point that you're saying you want to?
It's a little of both. And funnily enough, the St. Sessom work came to an end with the death of a lot of characters. Like, that was written into that story, that I'm going to deal with death at the end of this story. And I made those paintings over the course of 5 years. So it went from being hopeful and very colorful and lifelike, and then the end of that, by 2008, 2009, paintings were almost completely black.
5 years out, you'd already charted where that particular thing was going to end?
Yeah, I knew that this character's going to live and die. All the particulars in between how they got to that place weren't set, but as each painting happened, the story was built. So it's half text and half image.
Is that typical of how you work? Like, you chart like that far in the future?
The first 10 years of how I work, yes. Because I did two bodies of work. One about these mounds and where they came from. That was about 5 or 6 years. And then I kind of transitioned into this vegan cult from way in the past and talked about them. And now I'm on to something else. But it's back to Nate's question about death. Like, well, how is the character leading me, or what's leading me? Like I said, I came to a death in the work, and then I was confronted with a lot of mortal issues in real life. Like, my father in the ministry passed away around that time. Other family members passed away. Oh my God, I guess this is part of getting older. I'd always heard about these things, and now I'm confronted with these things in a very real way. And how do you make work? How do you do something as absurd and almost frivolous as making artwork in the face of these issues? So I kind of turned the mirror back on myself with a camera, or have it back on me, and the idea of degradation and the flesh, and that became the new narrative. Because I was already done with this other thing. It's like, I don't want to make any more of those paintings. And so what do? And usually in between bodies of work, I make work about myself anyway. Lots of self-portraits, very almost straightforward kind of stuff. Some of it's quite comic, some of it's tragicomic, but that's always a place I went. But now it's like that transitional work is becoming the main work.
Right, okay.
And so that's the show I'm having in a month at James Cohan. Is a culmination of this, what I would call, transitional
I was kind of surprised by the planning of the work. Like you guys just did that whole drum session, like there's a lot of improvisation in that. It seems like planning that far out doesn't leave space for that, for improvisation. But it sounds like even when you're not, you have this other body of work that you're working on that maybe does lose.
Well, I mean, if we're
not totally off.
Well, no, you're not totally off, but I want to clarify something about improvisation, is that improv it's riffing off a structure. So it's like you have the and on top of that, da-da-dum, dum-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-bum, da-da, so. Everything's up for question, and that's the to me that's where the art happens. Like it's not about how good I can draw. It's not about any of that technical stuff. It's about when decisions are made, how they're made, and when they're made. It's about timing, and I can set that the parameters early on or the tempo early on. And at any given point, those things can change. At any given point, and I try to give myself the license to make those changes, and that's where I think it's like a self-imposed anarchy or punk thing. That's where it's not about me bombing buildings out there. Maybe it's about bombing buildings on the inside and tearing down those taboos and walls that I have set up, which sometimes are a lot stronger than the walls that I live on. It's a weird thing because, again, the things that I think are important or are a necessity in my studio, the rest of the world ain't give a shit about it. And that's the weirdness of being an artist. But that's my own perspective. Some other artists would say, well, no, it's more about the structures out there than it is the ones inside. And I've never lived my life like that. I just don't care. Yeah.
So then that makes me think about I was thinking about this earlier, but the way you described your work kind of, I think it answers some of those questions, but you never talk about race explicitly. At least I've never seen anything like that.
Right.
But it sounds like all of that stuff might be just built into the metaphorical structure of the work.
Sure. I mean, it's all there, and I think about race just as much as any other person who is forced to think about race. So I guess the questions I ask myself are, I'm all about conserving energy because I've never been a super energetic person. So the reserves I have, I gotta put them towards something that I feel is gonna get me to this another place. And what's most helpful, if I'm out if the work has to be pedagogical or a teaching tool, what are the things I want to teach? Or sometimes the best teachers are the ones that are, the best corruptors as well. So I think about the relationship between corruption and teaching quite a bit. And I was lucky to have some amazing corruptors growing up. I was happy to watch Skinamax after midnight, see horrible things, horror movies, all this stuff that was antithetical to the church stuff that I was getting. But to me, it was all the same. It was all equal. And
equal in
importance. When I look back on it all, the pornos I found on the side of the road covered in leaves that I would take home and blow dry and look at them under the covers and go, what is that? To me, that was as good as learning about, some Bible. The black thing is interesting. It's really I feel like it's given to me. Like when I look at me, okay, I'm black. Now, along with that comes certain things that are gifted to me. And do I want to just pick from the things that are gifted to me to make art with? Do I want to go take some other things that I have to either take, steal maybe, or borrow? I don't know. It's just, I think
We call it appropriate.
they call it appropriating. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm equal parts black and equal parts maybe white. You know, having grown up here in this country, in this particular culture, at the time we grew up. I'm like, I listened to as much Police as I did Michael Jackson, or as P-Funk, or I watched MTV equally as I watched BET. What does that say? Like, what? I own those things as much as any white person owns that stuff. So those things I put in my ownership pile. So I got different piles of stuff, and I can take those things and construct masks out of those things. And those become the paintings. But no, I know. Yeah, it's funny. That's a funny issue.
Race.
Yeah, race and art. Break it down into all these facets. So you can talk about it in terms of class or accessibility, and you can talk about it in terms of race, which those things aren't mutually exclusive. There's a lot of crossover, but I think it goes back to Basquiat. I think he was the first one to kind of become that beacon or whatever, and I think the brother was smart enough to know what he was getting into and what he meant to the current culture and to subsequent, like, just all of art. Which there had to be a lot on his shoulders. I think back and I'm like, we wouldn't have been friends if we were contemporaries, because I think he was a precocious New York brat. Yeah, but I don't know. I still think he's one of the greatest artists of our time. Like, I can't deny that, and I still love his work. I look at those images all the time, and I'm happy to see one in person when I do get to see one. But I guess maybe that's just me saying I separate the artist from the art, and I'm perfectly capable of that. I try not to have expectations about who's going to be interested in the work, because I've shown work in Europe, and the people I thought they were going to be interested in it weren't interested at all. Like, to me, Germans, my work comes more out of a German sensibility. I've never had a German collector. A few Belgian, but the Italians were like more interested. And I've never truly given that much of a shit about Italian, like romantic, fluffy stuff. It just seemed too concrete. Germans, they're about grit and warts and death, and yeah, I relate more to that. So I've stopped trying to have expectations about who's going to be interested in the work, and that actually loosened up my attitude back here in the States. Because it's like, well, whoever's interested in the work is interested. Come step forward, then we can have a conversation.
So, you know, in talking about like all these sort of like we'll call them tropes. Like we've been kind of thinking about these black tropes in contemporary art making. We're doing a show where we're gonna try to deal with some of that.
Okay.
Right? But when you think about that stuff, right? What happens when, like you said, some of it does line up?
Some of it does.
What happens when there's a part that lines up that you really are into and you want to make work about? Or want to use in your work, but as soon as you put it in your work, it's going to look like...
Well, it gets lumped into a larger category.
Right.
Well, that's just the risk I have to take, you know? It's, and that can be said about any... I'm also incredibly anti-hipster, because even though it maybe at one point I might have identified as a young hipster back in late undergrad or something, and I grew out of it. But some of the things that I've made over the course of the years have lined up with certain trends.
I was going to say, you got these worn-rim glasses. Them joints are mad in style now.
They are. I was wearing them in 1996.
Okay.
Before, it's like, I remember when they started popping up on people. Like, what's going on?
As long as you got the lenses in them.
Yes, yeah, because I'm blind. I have to have them. These are functional.
Right.
But no, I love fashion and style and all that stuff. And, I don't know, keep tabs on it sometimes, but I try not to get consumed by it. Definitely try not to let the work get consumed by ideas of topicality of fashion and those things. But I don't know. Sometimes things I'm doing do line up with. Oh my God, I just saw some kid do that in this grad program I went to. It's like, do I continue to do it, or then I just say, well, I do it with more heart and I do it 100 miles an hour, and that'll make it better. Because what I see, I think what I'm responding to mostly that I don't like is the lack of conviction sometimes that people have. That it's just a fad, it's a fleeting thing, and then I've never thought about anything I've done in those terms as a fad or fleeting. So why would I start now? Why would I let fads corrupt what's happening in my studio? So we just power through it, even if it's not fashionable in 5 years, and you know it's going to take 6 years for you to do this thing. just keep going. And because really it's all about you and your work at the end of the day. And every, if you do it with conviction, 100 miles an hour, then everyone else is going to fall into place. But sometimes they don't fall into place as fast as you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. This has been cool and enlightening.
Do we have some kind of thing like, thanks for joining us, we'll be back.
This has been another installment of studio visits.
Not that this.
Not that this. He told you about the blog, right?
Yeah, that's what it's titled. Not that this.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right.
That's a wrap.
Because I'm going to have to change to another one.
What does it say? It? There's no. It doesn't.
No timing on
Doesn't
it?
show me the time.
Is it still red?
Yeah, it's still red.
It's still recording. You stop since he ain't expensive.